Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value-creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a SOCA researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Jackson. I am the founding head of school at South Bay Classical Academy and here in the South Bay of Los Angeles. Just moved to Hawthorne, California in June, and I'm so excited to be here on the podcast with you, Scott, and to chat about being a global citizen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dave, for being on the podcast with me. I'm also very excited to have you. I'm also very excited that you're in the South Bay because I think it's a wonderful place. And I also know that, we were connected through your lovely wife, who also was on the podcast. Shout out to Generosa. And I find that, every conversation that we have together and the various different meetups that we've had have been really intellectually stimulating and just very joyful. And I want to learn more about just what led to you becoming the kind of person that you are, and also the various interests that you have in education and beyond. What brings you to the South Bay, specifically this school? But how does one go about even founding a school? I'm sure that takes so much hard work, and it's very much a passion project because of the kind of education that you're bringing to the South Bay. So I want to hear about all of that and more. But I wanted to pass this over to you and have you share out a little bit about the milestones of your journey as an educator, what brought you to the work, and perhaps any big influences that have like in terms of like mentor figures as well. I'll just leave it up to you to kind of share what comes naturally, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah, no, that's great, Scott. I'll come back to what it's like to found a school towards the end, but just to think about my beginning as an educator, I'll go all the way back to high school, kind of high school graduation. I was having a conversation with some friends. We were doing like a graduation party. And it was actually a surprise party. My parents put together this like gathering of like all my friends, and I had this very disparate group of friends in high school. And so we're like all chatting at the party, like, oh, what are we gonna do? Like, what's life gonna be like after high school? And I was like, I was so set. I was going to law school, and I thought that going to law school would be the way that I made a difference in the world. I didn't know what that was gonna be, but yeah, I'm gonna go to law school, and that's gonna help me help people. But then I was talking to my friends and I said, you know what I would love to do? I'd love to like retire after a long time and just teach Latin, right? That would be really fun, And so go off to college, and I end up volunteering at a school working with some Latin students, some middle school students. I'd called my Latin teacher. I had an amazing Latin teacher, Nancy Allen, Sandalwood High School, Jacksonville, Florida. And, she was just so good. She built this amazing program. We went to all these like various competitions and things. And it was just like a great community of learning. And I wanted to kind of give that back to some kids. And so volunteered, working with middle school kids, and really loved that. Took them to competitions. They did really well. And when I was at the point of thinking about law school and sort of post-undergrad life, what does that look like? I was spending all my time like writing questions for the kids. And it just kind of hit me one day that I want to be a teacher. And I didn't know anything about how to do that. I just, I had my undergraduate degree I was wrapping up. And so I went and talked to the teacher with whom I had been volunteering for the past 4 years. Her name was Janice Mattering. And this was at Oak Hall School in Gainesville, Florida. And I said, I want to be a teacher. And she's like, David, I'm actually getting married and I'm leaving. This position is opening up. You should apply for it. And I was like, oh my God. So I went in to see the headmaster. And I gave him this big presentation about how we were going to build the best Latin and classics program in the country. His name was Rich Gaiman, and I'm sure he was like, yeah, kid, I'll hire you, fine. But taught Latin for 13 years. The program grew to a point where, it got so big we had to bring on a second teacher, and that was Generosa, my wife. And we were married then, and she was a graduate student studying for her PhD. And so that really worked well. And then people kept encouraging me to become an administrator, and I didn't know why. And they were like, you should do this. You're like really good at talking to people, and you're always, giving good advice. And I was like, okay, maybe. And then I started to think more and more about it and just kind of made a leap of faith into it and ran the high school program at Oak Hall, the high school and middle school program at one point, became an assistant head, and then ultimately went off to Canterbury School in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to become a head of school. Canterbury is a great school in the Midwest, 2 campuses, about 800 students, pre-K through 12. Loved that. There I got to do some fun things like, strategic planning, fundraising, managing 2 separate campuses with all the dynamics that go into that with teachers and students. And I got connected with a group of community leaders here in the South Bay about summer of 2024 who wanted to build a classical school. And they wanted to build a private school because they thought that would be the best way to convey the curriculum, and just thought the charter process would be very difficult. And I'd always dreamed of building a school, and especially a classical school. Classics was the thing that changed my life. It's the subject that allowed me to realize that I could learn anything. It sparked my intellectual curiosity, and I say all the time, everything that's good in my life came from my education, in particular my classical education. So it's always been my dream to give that back to students. It's been my work as a school leader and as a teacher. And so, really excited to get the project underway here. We just got to the point where we're finalizing our lease. We're taking over the Trinity Lutheran School in Hawthorne, which was operated by the church until the end of 2024. We're going to go in and do some renovations and, just get the building ready to go for August. We're recruiting families. We have our first launch event on February 7th, and we've got over 50 families signed up for it. So it's really exciting to be able to talk to families and kids and, talk about the value of classical education, build a great school community that's a loving, caring school community that really puts kids first and partners with their parents and, works to deliver a great classical education. And I can talk for days and days and days about classical education, but that's really the core of my journey, why I decided to become an educator. There is no day that goes by where I don't think about being in a classroom, teaching students and inspiring them. So I'm so happy to be able to do that on, more global level, to hire a great staff and, let them do great things with kids every day and be a part of that myself as well. So I'll teach Latin at the school, and just really looking forward to that, and could not be more thrilled to be here in the South Bay.
Wow, it's just so evident from the way that you're sharing and your story. You have so much passion for teaching and what you're able to do to bring this form of education, right, classical education, to the South Bay. How much it's really influenced you in such a positive way. I love that you said that classical education allowed you to learn anything, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that this idea of lifelong learning is often tossed about. People kind of speak to it, but I would say in practice, it doesn't necessarily show up, and
Mm-hmm.
people kind of I don't know. There's this kind of dulling effect that, unfortunately, in a lot of educational systems, maybe just speaking to the US, has been starting at earlier and earlier stages. That
Mm-hmm.
dulling effect can even dampen the enthusiasm of students to the point where they don't even really know why they're studying in the first place. And that
Right.
is a huge problem. I mean, there's so many problems, and I don't want to
Yeah.
be a Debbie Downer about all of them, but maybe if we could kind of focus on that point of like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what is that spark of learning that it is
Yeah.
so fundamental to classical education? Um,
Yeah.
I would like to hear from you. Could you briefly share with the
Mm-hmm.
listeners what is classical education in a nutshell? And again, how does that address that spark of learning and that,
Hmm.
genuine joy of learning?
Yeah. So the word spark is a really interesting and I think important word to deploy within the conversation of classical education. Um, so there is this idea that comes from the Renaissance, and even before the Renaissance, back to classical antiquity, there was a group of philosophers called the Neoplatonics, and so Plato had come and gone, and produced his works, and so now there's this new interpretation of Plato that happens, sometime in the second and third centuries A.D. And the Neoplatonics believed that inside every human being there was a spark. And in the Renaissance, this gets extrapolated even further. And it's like, God has planted in us this spark, and every human being has this potential for it to be unleashed, right? So I'll start there. I'll also say, and this is a quote from the Greco-Roman biographer Plutarch, who famously said, "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." Right. I think all of us who have become educated, and that can mean different things, certainly, to different people, but those of us who have had that spark of loving to learn things and being curious about the world, we can probably think back to a time that spark was ignited in us. And, at its heart, one of the things that classical education aims to do is to bring out that spark in the student. So there is a misconception about classical ed that it's rigid and too rigorous and old school and stuffy, and that could not be further from the truth. Classical education is about finding joy. It's about finding wonder in the world, sparking curiosity. And so, our main goal for the students as they walk through the halls of the school and they're in classrooms every day is to be curious, to be wondrous, to explore, to have that passion ignited in them. We do it through the vehicle of classical education, which in a modern sense means a couple of different things. I'll just give a little bit of detail about our school. So, we're very traditional in the sense that we believe phonics is really the best vehicle for teaching kids how to read. There are many different forms of that. So you think Orton Gillingham, or, we use a version of phonics called Spalding, right? So, they'll get all the phonograms right up front, and build, sort of core knowledge around their vocabulary and their reading comprehension. All the students will learn Latin, which for me personally is important, but it's not true of every classical school, right? There are some classical schools that don't offer Latin, but most of them do. We will teach a form of math called Singapore math, which, again, didn't exist in the time of the Greeks and the Romans, but it really helps the kids visually understand math, get at this deeper sense of math. So the Greek philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, you might have heard of him. He's the guy behind the Pythagorean theorem, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. We all learned that in school. But Pythagoras also said that the world exists in numbers and that we should see numbers in everything. And so one of the things that Singapore does is it creates spatial cues for kids and uses manipulatives so that while we're giving them the formulas, they understand the visual representation of what the math means, right? That was not true for when I was going to school, and I would have loved that. And I think it would have helped me understand math better. Classical education focuses on civics and, not only the Constitution, but sort of the underlying philosophy of democracy and, what it means to live as a citizen in a republic and, all those things. And it's about character formation and the moral imagination. So helping children and young adults be good people, right? And, be good citizens in the world. I know we're going to talk about a global citizen and what that means. And, what does it mean to be a good citizen? I think that's a very important function of a classical education. So those are just some things. I could go on forever talking about classical ed, though.
That's so great. And I really appreciate you sharing all of that. And how you brought in a history lesson as well. I think
Hmm.
it's so apt for a teacher like yourself, and to really kind of center it on this idea of what does it mean to spark learning,
Hmm.
and how that uh, really it takes place on an individual level, right?
Hmm.
There's like this attention and care that you bring, or the teachers and the staff bring,
Hmm.
to really understanding when that moment happens, right? Because never know when, but it's to
Right.
really kind of like cultivate that, right? And to see how it then expands, right?
Yeah.
And then hopefully, also getting out of the way or channeling that energy and excitement as
Right.
they pursue, very lofty ambitions and dreams, and everything else about the curriculum. It's evident how thoughtful it is, how it really serves to build these blocks, like the solid
Hmm.
foundations that will be necessary for them to then go out into society and not only get a good job and contribute to society, but also to really, uh, in a way, kind of be in awe of their surroundings, interrogate what's around them, take pleasure in all
Hmm.
the intricacies of life, and
Yeah.
through that have deeper fulfillment. And
Yeah.
I think that's such a wonderful way to speak about an education that I think is direly needed in the world that we live in. And I from what you shared, this classical education really meant so much to you growing up,
Hmm.
and you said that Latin in particular was a subject that you really, really, really enjoyed. That's what got you started on this, teacher and educator
Hmm.
journey. Could you speak about like what was it about the subject of Latin that really helped
Hmm.
ignite that spark within yourself?
Yeah, so I'll start with how I came to the decision to take Latin in the first place. I didn't take it until I was a junior in high school, and most people get started when they're younger. Maybe they're freshmen, or maybe they were in middle school when they started to learn Latin. But I started to get really into history and philosophy, and I started to read a lot, and I kept coming across all these Latin terms that I didn't understand and know, and so it's like, I need to take Latin. And so when I walked into the class, I'd already developed a natural curiosity of some things, and I was excited to be in the class. But I just had the most wonderful teacher, and she would host these after school sessions. And, we played like a Jeopardy style game with it, and we would go to the Junior Classical League competitions. And it was the first time ever that I had been surrounded by a community of peers who encouraged each other. So it was very common to come in after school on a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, and somebody would say, "Oh, like, what did you study last night? Like, what are you like reading right now?" And I'd never encountered anything like that. And I've become like such a huge believer in school, in the concept of the community of knowledge, like how we transmit and encourage each other to, through the process of learning, become better people, right? I think I really think that is the purpose of school. And at our school at SBCA, our motto in Latin is Sapientia pro humanitate, wisdom for the benefit of humanity, right? Using our wisdom to go out into the world and help others. So I got really into the JCL thing in high school, and it was amazing. I loved it. But that was just a vehicle, right? What it taught me was, and I'll never forget this. I was sitting in my American history class in 12th grade, and one of my classmates was reading Virgil's Aeneid in Latin, and she leaned over and she's like, "Hey, can you like, I'm kind of lost here. Can you like help me read like this passage?" And so I like leaned over and I was helping her with it, and it just kind of hit me like, I could do anything. Like if I can read this, like if I can take this ancient text and just read it, and I can train myself to do that, like I could do anything. And I think that's really what Latin helped me realize, and I think that's what a great education helps others to realize, that as human beings we have the potential to do anything, and it's when you realize that it's what the philosopher Immanuel Kant in the late 18th century, called Enlightenment. He wrote a essay called "What is Enlightenment?" And basically, what he says, it's when mankind, it's when you no longer have to rely on the tutelage of another to understand something. When you've gotten to the point where you can have this understanding, call it the allegory of the cave from Plato, whatever. But it's that idea, and Latin really did that for me. And when I became a teacher, like, my daily obsession was, how can I give that back to my students, right? Can I help students to realize that? And can I get them to that point where, through my enthusiasm and my teaching, right, can I gift that to them? Right. So yeah, that's just a little bit of how I view Latin for me on a personal level.
Wow, that makes me want to study Latin.
It's
And
pretty cool.
yeah, right? And there's just so much that you shared that really is inspiring. I love the way you framed it's a community of knowledge, right? Like, what is the
Hmm.
purpose of school? You said it's a community of knowledge, and the way that you described the Latin club that you were part of, and the eagerness and the excitement of really asking one another what they're studying and
Hmm.
wanting to help and learn together. I don't know. I think for me, that didn't really, I didn't have a sense of that for myself until like college.
Hmm.
But for you to have that start, in secondary, I think is already so promising for, yeah, like what will then come, right, of your studies.
Right.
And to think of like one studies with some kind of like I think deeper purpose, right? Because you said that
Hmm.
Latin helped you to, come to this understanding and realization that like the world is your oyster, right? What is it
Hmm.
that you want to do? And then it comes down to taking action towards that. And for you, it sounds like becoming the best teacher you can be
Hmm.
is where you really honed your skills and brought in all of your interests and passions and in a really noble way, I wanted to extend that to many other young learners so that they could experience that sense of fulfillment just as you had.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's it really just like uplifts the whole like profession of like teaching. I feel like when you're able to understand school in that way and recognize that the the spark that you're hoping to ignite in other students can only really happen when it's been ignited within yourself first,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I think that that's really powerful. I think teachers play such a fundamental role in schools, um, specifically for that purpose. Of course, the curriculum, the school
Hmm.
facilities, all of that are very important. But I do think that that student teacher kind of dynamic is so
Hmm.
important. Could you speak a little bit more to that? Since I know you have
Yeah.
many years of teaching experience and you've seen so many different successes in the
Hmm.
programs and classes that you've led. I'm sure you've also had rough patches where maybe there
Hmm.
were frustrations and difficulties
Sure.
and what have
Yeah.
you. But in terms of student teacher kind of dynamics,
Hmm.
how is it that you approach that? And then also within the wider context of
Hmm.
classical education, what does that mean?
Yeah, no. I think the student-teacher relationship is the most important relationship in a school, right? It's where the success of the school really rises or falls. If there's a great relationship between students and teachers, um, and respect, learning. So that's number one. I think you hit the nail on the head with the idea that there's curriculum, but then there's the teacher. And some people refer to this as the primary curriculum and the secondary curriculum, right? So, I would never say that curriculum is not important. I believe that it is very important. But, if you can have curriculum and if you don't have great teaching behind that curriculum, you're not going to have a lot of success in the scope of your school. Like, both have to exist alongside of each other. And so I like to refer to it as as the love and knowledge quotient. So, teachers have to have love for their students, and care really is what that is, right? Love and care, empathy, but they also have to have knowledge, and they have to bring that knowledge and be able to convey that knowledge to their students at every level. That's a kindergarten teacher working through letters or numbers, and all the amazing things that kindergarten teachers do. And that's a calculus teacher, right, in the 11th or 12th grade, teaching derivatives, or a whole number of other things. And so I think those aspects of teaching for me are the key. But yeah, it starts with teaching, and one of my favorite things as a school leader is to really be obsessed with great teaching and learning, and for that to be the genesis of the school's culture, right? We're thinking about teaching and learning. We're thinking about inspiring kids to learn every day. And there are some times when, we try a lesson and it just falls flat, right? And we got to go back to the drawing board. But as teachers, we should always be thinking about, how do I best convey this information, this lesson to my students, over and over again.
And can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Because, you mentioned you're talking about like how important teachers are, and yeah, that the success of a school will be determined based off of the quality of these teachers. But what makes for a good teacher? I mean, it's a very simple question, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, how would you unpack that?
Yeah. Well, I would go back to love and knowledge, right? For me. But, there are some real definitive things that you look for. A good teacher is one who knows when to tighten the reins and when to loosen them. A good teacher knows and practices a classroom that is both orderly and joyful. And that's a balance, right? That's a balance. A teacher realizes that they're a caretaker, but that the students are not theirs in this total sense, right? We all hear stories about teachers like, hey, there's a boundary issue here, right? With a student. So I think that sense of creating, a structure, right? Kids need structure, but kids also need play. And both of those things can exist within a classroom space and outside of the classroom space at the same time. So, and it can be a delicate balance, but if it's just grind all the time, the students can struggle with that. So you got to be able to have some fun with them, depending on the grade level, the lower and middle grades, and I would say even to an extent the upper grades. You can't take yourself too seriously. And one of the things that I always try to coach my teachers on, because it was a great piece of advice that I got when I started teaching, is, um, try as hard as you can not to take it personally. Um, the kids are, they're saying this, they're doing that. They're not doing it because of you, or in spite of you. They're doing this because they're kids, and they might need a correction, right? But if you can do that, if you can separate yourself from that and live in a world, and I think this is really important as well, live in a world that's non-judgmental of them, because I feel really strongly that when we judge them, we lose them. I think that about people in general, but I think that about kids especially, and so those are some of the things that I think are really important in terms of the recipe of what makes a great teacher.
Wow, there's a lot of wisdom that you shared just now, and I appreciate you for unpacking that question of what does it mean to be a good teacher, because what you shared is rooted in your own experiences as well
Mm,
as from your own learnings from really great teachers before you, and then that last bit you said about like when we judge them we lose them. I was like,
mhm,
oh, that was profound, because yeah, it applies well beyond just the classroom. environment, but even in our day-to-day lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, I don't know, maybe just the way society functions and how we're kind of conditioned to kind of make these judgments. Um, and yeah, and kind of, I don't know, it can lead to barriers. It can lead to friction. And I
Mm-hmm.
think when you're really trying to, you know, build a relationship with another person, learn from them, work together with them, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it might be, you really want to give them the benefit of the doubt and yeah, and approach it in a similar way. So in that sense, I think it would behoove a lot more people to think like a good teacher. But I think the training of being in a classroom of, you know, I don't know, a dozen or more students is
Mm-hmm.
it's tough. It definitely can wear on you. But I think, for myself, when I think about how I learned to become a teacher, it was often trial by fire,
Yep.
and just testing out a lot of things, going
Mm-hmm.
back to the drawing board, like you said, seeking from those who have more experience, and taking deep breaths and just continue trudging forth.
Mm-hmm.
So, with all of that you shared, I mentioned that there was so much wisdom to what you talked about. And I wanted to bring the attention, or focus on the school motto of the South Bay Classical Academy,
Mm-hmm.
which you said in Latin, so I cannot actually repeat that unless I had it written in front of me. But I did, write down, it says wisdom for the betterment of humanity. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's such a beautiful mission statement. So the first question I want to ask is, how did that mission statement come
Mm-hmm.
about? Like, what were
Right.
some of the discussions that were necessary to then get to such a
Mm-hmm.
succinct and powerful school motto?
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott. So it came about as I worked with the board throughout the 24-25 years. So I was finishing up my time in Indiana at Canterbury, but I was also able to spend a little bit of time that year with our board, and we were working on the vision of the school, what we wanted it to be. So dreaming big about the school. So I had prepared some potential mottos and things that I thought would resonate with them. And it was so fascinating because we got in a room, we started talking, and they were like, "These mottos are great, but and basically the conversation was, we don't really like any of them, right? We like pieces of them, we like parts of them, but what we really want to convey is the idea that we're cultivating wisdom in students. And so let's just let's differentiate wisdom and knowledge, right? Things, right? We all know things, we learn things in school, but how do we apply those things? How do we have discernment, and quote unquote wisdom? So yeah, I mean, we want students to be able to use their knowledge for the betterment of other people, for humanity, which was, I felt, and those were the words that were spoken out loud in English. And then we all looked around and went, "Whoa, that's it." Like when we think about our school, when we think about our students and the type of people that we want them to become, right, through the vehicle of a classical education, we want that. That's inspiring. Sign me up for that. Um, I for years at Canterbury, I would meet with incoming kindergarten parents, and I would say to them, "Imagine, your son or daughter, like they're graduating. It's 12 years from now. They're graduating. They're getting their diploma. Like, what do you want to see them, become in that moment? And nobody ever said I want them to go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or or even said I want them to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or an entrepreneur. Like that never came up. What parents said is I want them to be a good person. I want them to have a grounded sense of purpose, and I want them to be confident and ready to take on challenges in the world and resilient. And these are not necessarily within the curricula of most schools. right? The way that we view it is through, the literature that we read, the stories that we tell, the lessons that we inculcate, the history that we learn, the mathematics that we learn, right? That'll be a part of the story of how we educate. Um, but really, it came about from this organic process, and we looked around and we said, yeah, we want our kids uh, to cultivate, want to cultivate their wisdom. We want them to go out and we want them to use that to make the world a better place for the benefit of all of humanity, all of humankind. So we're talking about global citizenship, right? And you spend a lot of time on your podcast talking about what that means, right? Yeah, we want our kids to go out and do good in the world. And that to me, I feel like if you're standing up and you're saying, this is who our school is and this is what will be, to me, that's inspiring. It's not just like, oh, yeah, the kids will do great on the SAT, or they'll, learn calculus and they'll be good at chemistry and they'll read Jane Austen. Like, those are all great things, trust me. But like, we're gonna use our wisdom to benefit humanity. Yes, yes, fill my soul up with that, right? Yeah.
I love that. No, it's beautiful, and I think when it comes to something like a mission statement, school motto, like you know, it, people read it and it strikes a chord, and I
Hmm.
think those are the families that end up deciding to enroll their child, and I think that's so important. It's so cool to hear the origins of that, and really understanding that so many conversations had to take place in
Hmm.
order to arrive at uh, that that statement, and all of it was informed by you know who knows how many decades of experience, and
Hmm.
who knows like how many different like kind of personal insights that then led to
Hmm.
these conversations, and these kind of back and forth. This looks good, this doesn't look good,
Hmm.
let's kind of mix and match, and like let's
Hmm.
really then scrap everything and then like focus on wisdom. And I think
Yeah.
yeah, it's, and then what you were talking about in terms of like the vision for parents about their child, what will this be, this this almost like this project, this human project of
Yeah.
raising this individual before me. And no one knows what necessarily like the details of it will be, the different pathways that they're going to take. But you described these values,
Hmm.
and these dispositions, the mindsets that will really help students to navigate increasingly complex life scenarios, but
Hmm.
also having that groundedness that you were talking about, that deeper sense of like, what is it that I'm aiming towards? And then the confidence to know
Hmm.
that you can get there. And
Yeah.
that's so beautiful. I think that really, classical education or not, that's kind of what education writ large should be.
Hmm.
And it also speaks to like how long term a project education is, that you
Hmm.
can't just look at it from one semester to the next. You're talking decades, if not
Right.
entire lifetimes,
Right.
generations. Because then
Yes.
not only there, so this parent will be enrolling their child, but in a way they're kind of enrolling themselves as well, don't you think?
Mhm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of my dreams at some point, because I've been thinking about this a lot, is to create some opportunities of learning for parents and adults. Um, I was sitting at a conference in New York City a number of years ago, and we were listening to a presentation from an acting troupe in New York, and they're a veteran group, and they put on Greek tragedies, and they do readings from Greek tragedies, and they were doing a reading from the Agamemnon, and it's the scene where Agamemnon has to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia in order for the Greek fleet to sail to Troy, and it's like this very painful moment where like he doesn't want to do it, but he has to do it. The gods are, you know, impelling him to do it, and if he doesn't do it, then they can't go to Troy. But we were all sitting around going, "Wow, like I understand this in such a different way in my late 30s than I would have ever done at 16." but we have 16-year-olds read those texts sometimes. And it was really a conversation about the timelessness of literature, right? And the humanness of literature. And I've talked to several parents who've said like, oh, I'd love to come in and learn this thing or be in your class or like, study, this text with this teacher. And, how cool would it be to set up like a, after hours, like, just like classes for, I mean, I feel like if I could go back to like middle school with just my attitude towards learning now, like how much could we learn and accomplish? And, it's part of growing up, but I love that idea of the parents being a part of it too, potentially. And, it makes me think about that, hey, we could be like an extension school and do something for the parents. That'd be fun.
It would be so much fun, and that speaks to the family community engagement side of things, where we all see each other as partners in this exciting journey that is for their child to kind of
Mm,
really progress and learn, and I think just kind of go back and forth, this like they share and the parents can share rather than just it being a one-way street. Unfortunately, I think in cases where students are not enjoying the school that they're at,
mm,
there's not even an exchange going on.
right.
And that's the kind of like, fragmenting or, alienating kind of side of where things have gotten in terms of yeah, education in a lot of
Mm,
places. But not to, dwell on that. I think the fact is like what you're talking about, I don't think it's too far fetched. And I know that it only takes a specific, I don't know, like weekly meetup that will get a parent interested,
mm,
or maybe it's a particular guest leader, I mean, a guest
mhm,
speaker, or maybe a particular subject, or
mhm.
whatever it is to kind of, hook them for them to
Yeah.
then, have their own spark be
Mm,
reignited. Hopefully, it's
yeah.
already there, but, to really, pool their interest and their passions together.
Mm,
Because again, it goes back to what you were talking about, that community of knowledge that it's just
mhm,
meant to expand and kind of just envelop everyone. And also, a quick aside, my mom, she was never much a reader, and she didn't have a very solid education growing up in South Korea, and then she was an immigrant coming to the U.S. So she always kind of felt like, oh, I can't read, I just don't have that training. But I would say the past couple of years, she's gotten into like audiobooks, and
mm.
she's been reading all of these books now.
That's
And she was
amazing.
like listening to Charlotte's Web and then Where
Mhm.
the Red Fern Grows. And I know these are some of the books, these are classics,
Yeah. Two of my
but the way,
favorites.
right. And so the way that she's talking about it and like the kind of just, it's like that childlike, excitement.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we all need that to be rekindled within us, whether
Yeah.
we're actually, in like elementary school, or we're like in our 30s, or, a little bit further down the line. Not to reveal
Right.
my mom's age, but she's yeah, shout out to my mom. But yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that's a really, really great way to engage parents. And so, I wanted to now kind of ask a little bit more, because I know we kind of touched on this when
Mhm,
we were discussing like the motto of really preparing them to make the world a better place. And so,
mhm,
could you speak to the civic side of like classical
mhm.
education, and
Yeah.
yeah, and what does it mean to be a good citizen as well? I'm curious.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's the sort of, I'm going to go back to the 18th century, kind of sort of the time of the, Age of Revolution, foundation of the American Republic, French Revolution, that sort of ideal of citizenship. And it's shifted, somewhat since then, but I think there are some core principles that remain. And even going back to, ancient Greece, right? If we go back to ancient Athens, like what does it mean to be a good citizen? And fortunately, we live in a world where, the meaning of citizenship has expanded, because in ancient Athens, citizenship was pretty limited, right? In terms of being a male property owner of Athens. And, of course, not everyone was a citizen at the founding of our country, right? Citizenship has expanded over time, rights and liberties have expanded over time. But I think it means a couple of core things. I think number one, it means being informed, right? It means knowing. not only about, history, laws, constitution, civil rights and civil liberties, all those things. I think educating students in that way is key. I think helping them participate in it, like what does it mean to, run for office or be a public servant? What does it mean to volunteer and to invest in your community? I think that's an important aspect. I think it's also important to teach them to have conversations and to um, be confronted with ideas that are maybe not ones that you share, but being able to, consider those ideas and not be moved to like anger or vitriol. I think if you look across our political landscape, and I will say it's been this way for a long time. We can go back to the 1790s, right, which was one of the most contentious periods in American political history, Federalists and Anti-Federalists. But I think that, one of the things that we've sort of, I don't want to say mastered, but it's been a core part of our experience is, hey, we can have a conversation and we can disagree politically, but that doesn't mean we have to be enemies, right? We can be friends and disagree politically about our opinions. So teaching kids to be able to do that, to engage in civil discourse, the marketplace of ideas, I think that's critically important to not only, their American citizenship, but also a global citizenship, right? To be able to converse with others. We're always going to have disagreements about things. And, what a boring life it would be if we just all agreed about how everything should work. Actually, that would probably be pretty terrible because we'd be living under some form of tyranny. But, helping kids to understand that, we can have conversations and disagree, but still be the best of friends at the end of the day. I think that's something that classical education aims to inculcate within the students, being able to think critically, think for yourself, defend your ideas, but at the end of the day, have a good conversation with somebody that doesn't, create vitriol or anger or, all those things.
Wow. Yeah, that I agree with all the points that you raised. I feel that there's an important part about how informed we are, so that we could then make confident decisions and actions, because we're all I feel like this word interconnected comes up a
Mm-hmm.
lot in my discussions about global citizenship. But again, it's like knowing how we're enmeshed within this web of relations with others. And so hence, let's really try to be more mindful and conscientious as
Mm-hmm.
far as the conversations that we have, the participation that we take, knowing that we want to uh, be a value add to our community. We want to really be able to support others, and I think again, like this point that you said about it's like you didn't frame it this way, but it's like being able to like engage with others who have differing viewpoints and be able to like hold space for that and
Yeah,
respect that without
absolutely.
necessarily running away or taking it personally
Mm-hmm.
or going in the other direction of just fighting back, right?
Right.
Lashing out or the vitriol that you mentioned. So these are really important for us now. And I think like in the is it most like so how do we prepare someone like what is the education more of like modeling that, or is the
Mm-hmm.
opportunities that we give young people
Mm-hmm.
to play a role, like to step into that role?
Yeah.
Could you just share like just a few things about how do we foster someone like that?
Right. So I think it comes down to a couple of important points. One, I think the adults have to model that. Because kids are perceptive. They pick up on things. So I think the adults have to model that type of behavior. I think also the idea of Socratic dialogue is important. Especially in any school environment, but in a classical school in particular, kids should be discussing things a lot. There should be conversation, there should be engagement, um, and the teacher can be the great arbiter of that. Um, and so when I taught history for many years, we would do seminars, and the students would prepare the questions, and the questions were always meant to be analytical. Not just a factual question about when Napoleon died, right? We can look that up, right? It's 1821. Who cares? But like, did Napoleon save the French Revolution or did he destroy it, right? And now the students are spending 10 to 15 minutes, conversing on this point and discussing it. So I think the more we can help students to be comfortable with the dialogue, the more we're going to help them establish comfortability with being, just a citizen in the world and their place in it. But there are so many different things that we can do to model that and teach that. I'm a big believer in having students stand up and give presentations. And, for a lot of students, that's uncomfortable. For me as an adolescent, it was very uncomfortable. I got over it through the concept of being in front of people. But, I think all of those things are powerful mechanisms to helping the students be comfortable expressing their opinions, comfortable, like you said, holding space for opinions with which they don't agree, and ultimately, being productive contributors to advancing the human conversation forward, if that makes sense.
If that does make sense. And you mentioned the word comfortable a couple times, and I don't know if it's ever and I'm not insinuating that this is what you
Mm.
meant, but to reach a state of like, oh, I'm comfortable now and everything's good, right? Learning,
Oh,
like
right.
move on to the next thing. But I do
Yeah.
feel that another reframe of that, and I think what you were expressing more, is this need to be able to sit in like that uncomfortable state
Yeah.
and
Like discomfort.
recognize that and there's this discomfort, yes, and then
Yeah.
recognize that there's a lot of growth to be had
Hmm.
in that particular state. Because I think
Yeah.
with getting out of that comfort zone, at least for myself, like when I was in front of a
Yeah.
lot of people talking or
Hmm.
doing, I don't know, having a responsibility of some kind and
Yeah.
trying to carry that forward, um, it always is, difficult, but it's
Yeah.
me getting out of my comfort zone and then pushing forward.
Yeah. It's kind of like embracing the discomfort, being
Hmm.
comfortable with either being exposed to things that you don't agree with, or, understanding that, you know, you've got to, I mean, to use a cliche, right? You kind of roll with the punches, but it's really not that. It's really being able to handle moments where, yeah, you don't necessarily agree or there's ambiguity, right? And you can, maybe that's a form of resiliency, sort of being able to kind of bounce back from things. But yeah, I think, holding, you use the phrase holding space. I really like that. But yeah, being comfortable with discomfort.
Hmm. Yeah, and then that ambiguity thing, that's I think really powerful as well. We tend to just want things to be in black or white,
Right.
and not necessarily really face up to the ambiguity that is probably the actual reality of it. And I
Right.
think the leadership, you know, lessons that young people can learn by really holding that space for ambiguity and then not maybe being too quick to jump into it
Mhm.
or make a decision or a judgment, but to yeah, have that curiosity as far as like, well, am I really seeing this? Like what are the different angles and how
Mhm.
do I approach this? Maybe it's methodically or maybe in a different strategy and recognizing that there's no right answer really. It's really just about, your own preparation and your mindset going into it and then yeah, rolling with the punches, as they say.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much, David. And I've been really enjoying this conversation so much. I feel like we can go on for much longer.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you one more question, if that's okay. And it's
Yeah.
a question that I ask all my guests. It's a book or movie recommendation. Anything you'd like to
Hmm.
share for the listeners?
Book or movie? Okay. Yeah, I think my movie tastes are way too like popular, I'd kind of go down some like Star Wars or Marvel rabbit hole. So I'm going to do a book. Might be a little more enlightening. So interestingly enough, there's been a huge revival of like Stoic interest in Stoic philosophy. So like Marcus Aurelius and others, Epictetus and Seneca, and it's been really interesting to see. And I've been a big proponent of Stoic philosophy because it's helped me, in particularly in my leadership, to to kind of be like the calm in the storm sometimes. So there's a writer, his name's Ryan Holiday. He's wrote a bunch of stuff, but he wrote a book called "The Obstacle Is the Way," and it's about overcoming obstacles. And I use this phrase all the time with my staff, because in life we're going to be confronted with challenges. And I use this phrase, with high school students in particular, because, in my life as a high school principal, invariably I would have a student come in to my office and they would just like, they're overwhelmed, right? They've got all these things and the world is so tough and their classes are so tough, and, they hit a wall, right? And I would always say, well, the obstacle is the way, right? We have to overcome the obstacle. We can go over the wall, we can go through it, but we can't just turn away from the wall and avoid it. And so this idea that when we have a challenge, like embracing that challenge, leaning into that challenge, meeting that challenge, that could be a student, that could be a parent, that could be, whatever it is. I'm talking about school life, but whatever it is that's in front of you, embrace the challenge. You might say, oh, I'm not going to deal with this thing. I'm just going to avoid it, or like it'll go away. Just embrace it. Go for it. Lean into it. The obstacle is the way, going through the obstacle. So it's a short read, but I think it's one of those things that from a leadership perspective can help you, maybe navigate, and just a life perspective, navigate a circumstance that we all experience as humans, right? That thing that gets put in front of us that's just driving us crazy and we don't want to deal with, right? Just go through it. Yeah. So Ryan
Yeah.
Holiday, The Obstacle is the Way.
Thank you so much for that book recommendation. And if I may, that actually got me thinking about how you said your movie interests involve like Star Wars or like Marvel, and then when you said the obstacle is the way, it was making me think of like the Mandalorian, because they say this is the way.
This is the
And
way. Yeah.
I was like,
No,
oh, maybe
totally.
there's a connection there, right? In
Yeah.
terms of like that
Yeah.
philosophy of like just kind of very like honestly looking at that obstacle and just saying, I'm going to walk down this path and
Right.
I'm going to create the best outcome through
Yeah.
this journey. So,
Yeah.
so just thought I'd put that out there
No, it
too.
was a cool
But
connection. Mandalorian was definitely a very cool and unique part of the Star Wars experience, I felt.
yeah, definitely. So that could be another recommendation too.
Indeed.
So,
Yeah, of course.
yeah. Well, so thank you so much, David, for this very, insightful conversation about classical education. Also very inspiring too, just with the way that you shared your journey as a teacher, and the really exciting work that you're doing in founding a brand new school here in the South Bay. It's really important to have more models like this. And I think also, in a way, the school can be a spark for something much
Yeah.
bigger within Southern California and then even beyond. So I'm wishing you all the best, and really cheering for the success of the school. And wanted to pass it over to you one last time to share any final thoughts, any final send-offs.
Yeah, no, it was great being on the podcast. Been a long time listener, so it was nice to finally be a participant. I was looking forward to it, and just appreciate everything that you're doing to, to bring the concept of global citizenship to a wider audience. I think is extremely important, and I'm looking forward to tuning in and seeing how it goes.